Fabulous. Okay, so let's start. Mnemonics, memory techniques. Okay, so we're going to cover, it's going to be a very general class, okay? There's a lot to cover, you can imagine. Just in psychology itself, memory is a huge, huge subject. So this is going to be a general thing, but just about memory, very brief, what it is, how it works, a few different types of memory, but really it's going to focus on one thing, and that's how to use memory techniques, how to remember things. It can be anything, to help you study, to help you remember your shopping list, and really anything you want to remember. And it really is, it's fantastic. It's very powerful. Some of you may have come across some of the things already, but it really will save you writing things down, because writing things down, you know, at the end of the day, it's not as good. It really isn't. These are the things we're going to go through. We're going to go through what it is, categorization, mind maps. Some of you may have heard of mind maps before. Flashbulb memory, OAR, which is something that will help you remember things. How to remember names, because my friend Koichi asked me that during the week. Nice to see you, Koichi. I'm just going to set Koichi as host. So if anybody has any, there we have a backup host just in case. Fantastic. Names, and then I'm going to focus on the memory techniques themselves, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on there. So even though it looks as though it's at the end, it won't be at the end as such, because we'll be spending more time on that than anything else. So there we have it. So what is memory? Okay, so memory has got three basic structures. It's encoding, and that's when you see something, when you sense something, when you experience it through any of your senses. From there it goes to, you store it. After you sense it, you encode it and you store it. And then of course, when the time comes, you retrieve it. Retrieve it can be a subconscious, it can be something that you do consciously, and it can be triggered and you won't have any control over it at all. And I'll explain about how these things are triggered involuntary. And of course there's factors that, depending on how you feel, the mood you're in, physically and mentally, and that can affect any of these things. It can affect how things are encoded in the first place. So when you experience something, it can affect how, depending on your mood and your physical state, it can affect how you remember it. And equally, when you retrieve something from memory, again, your state of mind and your state of body, well, that can affect how you then remember something afterwards. So it's all very, you know, it can be a bit of a mishmash, and it's not as straightforward as some people may think. Don't need to be sorry, Pri. Don't need to be sorry. Okay, so any questions from that? Okay, let's move on. If anyone has a question, you can ask as you go along. The types of memory that you've probably heard used in the past are short-term memory, which actually now is more being used as the term short-term memory is being replaced with the term working memory. So if you ever hear the term working memory and short-term memory, it's actually the same thing, and working memory is the more modern term of the phrase working memory. And what that is, that's the memory that only lasts a few seconds. If someone asks you to write down a telephone number, or if you see something and you think, I just got to write that down, that's what short-term memory is. You won't remember it tomorrow, because that's not how it works. That's when it's transferred to long-term memory. Again, it's much more complicated than that. Lots of stages in between the two, how they're encoded, how they're retrieved. But you know, very basically, that's what they are. We have a short-term memory and a long-term memory. Exactly like RAM. Now, of course, there's a difference between remembering something and knowing something, and that's very, very important. And that's really what I want you to focus on right now, thinking about the difference between the two. When you learn something, like learn a language or learning something to do with your exam prep, anything like that, what you're aiming to do, what you're aiming to achieve is not to remember, but you're aiming to know it. Because when you know it, then you don't have to remember it, because you just know it. And that's a very distinct difference. And if you can grasp that, that will really help you when you learn anything. You just need to ask yourself, you know, do I know that? or do I have to think about it and remember it? And a big part of putting things into your long-term memory, which is really almost knowing it, is repetition. And it really is repetition. When you study something, whether it's a language or anything at all, sometimes we put it off. We've all done it, haven't we? We put, oh, I can't do it at the moment. I need at least 2 hours to study it. I haven't got those 2 hours now. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. And you sometimes you just never, you keep putting it off. But sometimes it's okay just to, if you're learning a language, just to put a CD on in the background, and it doesn't matter if you're not sitting there and you're giving it your complete full attention, because you'll still be becoming accustomed to it, and that's the most important thing. Someone joined the room there. Fantastic. So that's the difference. Okay. So remembering and knowing, and that's really important, and I want you to make a note of that almost. Categorization. Categorization is fantastic. It really, really is. It involves our entire thinking evolves around categorization. So what is it? What it is are things that we categorize subconsciously as we grow from being children. We group things together, pockets of information, and the reason we do that is to stop us going, that is Marco when I was a baby, Anshu, you're exactly right. When I was a little Italian boy, using some Latin. That's it, Patrick. Categorization, we create pockets of information and memory to stop us almost going mad, because we need this information. We need assumptions. We need categories. When someone tells you, let's go out to a restaurant tonight to eat, you already know what that means. It means you've got to get there. It means when you go in, you've got to find a table, or a table will be found for you. It means you've got to sit down. Someone's going to give you a menu. You know all this stuff already, but it means you don't have to ask all the time. When someone says to you, I was burgled, someone came in and burgled me, if you have experience of what burglary, what it feels like to be burgled, you're going to empathize with them perhaps more than someone who hasn't had that experience. Again, all of our experiences, we group them into categories, and it helps us sort out and function as humans, because otherwise how will we go ahead? Now, of course, categories sometimes also play a disadvantage, because sometimes we categorize things unfairly. Sometimes we group people together in a way that we shouldn't, perhaps, because our experience tells us, oh, I know someone like you, or I've met a person like that, and that's not really fair sometimes. So that's something that's not always a good thing with categorization. So if you can think about how, when someone tells you something, you think, that reminds me of something, sometimes, and it will remind you of it based on your experience. Whether it's a good thing or not is another matter, and that's something, if you can keep that in mind when you remember something, to evaluate it objectively, that will certainly help. Patrick has a question there. So what about the meaning of dreams? That's a huge subject, Patrick. What about the meaning of dreams? It does depend on every person. Some people may have don't attribute any meaning to it. Some people do. Of course, Freud based his whole theory on that was one of the things he did. That's a big thing, Patrick, and a very good question. Although not really related to memory. So we have it to stop us going crazy, so we don't have to think about everything all the time, because it just triggers. And because it triggers, we can just say that it's natural, because that's how it works. And that goes probably across many species. If we have a pet, the pet knows when, if you have a dog, the dog knows when you get a lead that it's triggered. Its memory knows that when it sees the lead, it's going to go out for a walk, and it gets excited. So that can go with a lot of animals. Okay, so here's one good thing here. Mind maps. Who's not heard of mind maps? Has anybody not heard of them? Costel, you have a question. You were forced to do them, Arky. That's you never heard of mind maps. Okay, a mind map is a way of taking notes. Okay, and it's better. Some people argue that it's better than creating a list because it's more natural, and it's based on categories, like I've just said. So if you're in, let's just look at this example here. Can everybody see this example? Okay, or can anybody not see it? It doesn't really matter if you can't read what it says. It's not that important. But you can see the concept. The concept is you have a general idea. Okay, so you put that idea in the middle. So here we've got mind mapping. But let's just say we're going to do a mind map on what we're going to do tomorrow, like a to-do list.